This le ngado de shui manzu pimi lana me buti konsitam gön chum chola kuja dame gone jamne gindu gide andana shi bende zogzu ube gyulen namba ani charo kalyo namba chige khan pebe kunde rokzokha kuzab adene the sugar dharamsala lyebe sishu zöbe ani gyabe duksum ni pebe kunde nam sangmalinge thoma gasha chapche che ning thagwande chamji de sile shuai adaringe ma shuedi inge thon shu chaba che shuai kansin kesinge 벽에 돈에 닝두 슈사바 인도 갑라 안타린데 총둘레 팽에 믹스에 케바하 망부치기다 벽에 마행이 임베체 안드록조 하체 인도 갑란 쿠란소 가주이 빔딕수다 네단디게 야가 켐베 임베이나 거두 야고 용야 체도 아니 인게니 슈초바 체치웨랑 So good morning to all our guests. I think the rain god agreed with me that it poured like anything last night, but we have a good day. So I think you can clearly say, because we are talking about culture, which includes Buddhism and spirituality, so Tibet being the roof of the world, the highest mountains, so we are nearest to heaven. So we do have direct communication to gods. So the rain of gods also listen to us from time to time, so for which we are very grateful. I can assure you the afternoon weather, but morning weather, I think it's clear. Because I could see among the organizers, Kedor is walking back and forth. At the end, you can clearly see, given the weather, the logistic, all that, he got a few more gray hair, and you can see Finance Kalin being the Kalin of the organizing department is running up and down. He also got some gray hair. By the way, both of them already have gray hair. They got extra gray hair organized in this conference. And Dr. Kunjo is somewhere here. He's the media spokesperson for the conference. He also got extra hair. So that's why you will see the thank you message delivered by the finance secretary, who doesn't have any extra gray hair, so that they want to project that they were calm, cool, and collected. But I know, I just want to lick it out that they all were stressed out. So the organizers and staff, they've been running, up and down and doing wonderful job. And then I have a big dilemma, like the health theater performance you had, you all witnessed last night. Being the Sikyong, now all 5 Kalyan spoke about the department. Now, if I say even extra word more than any other department, I will have complaints from today on for weeks and months to come. Now, I have no idea how to give a keynote address balancing all the departments and saying all are doing wonderful job. Now, because often they accuse me of being neutral, unbiased Sikyong, so that everybody gets, all the department gets equal funding, equal project, equal support, which doesn't happen. So already Health Kalyan hinted that he runs the smallest, youngest department and asking, pitching for funding from 1.2 million to more. So you can clearly see, So that's the, like the 5 organs, I have to determine which organ is more important. Each one of them thinks they're equally important. So that's the dilemma I have as well. And hopefully, I'll do okay. As my colleagues provided a summary of their respective departmental challenges and opportunities, from my point, 4 challenges facing Tibetan communities are as follows. On culture, how do we make sure that Tibetan youth who migrate from settlements to urban areas and foreign countries are integrated but not assimilated in foreign culture? That they prosper and contribute to the society where they live, but also preserve culture and maintain their proud and rich Tibetan identity. On development, how do we provide skills and capital to generate employment for the youth so that they have reason to stay in India and maintain India as a base and not migrate abroad. For that, we need a workforce development as well. On education, how do we produce highly educated and professionalized Tibetan community? That's the main challenge. And on health, we need a holistic approach of combining both Tibetan and allopathic medicine with focus on preventive measures and community health service. That is why we have this 550 Vision Conference. As for the 550 Vision, I had an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2012, where I was told that one of my main responsibilities as a leader is to lead the movement forward as if His Holiness is not there. When I first heard what His Holiness said, I was very emotional. It was overwhelming, and I went on a denial mode, thinking he never said it, and I didn't hear it. But then His Holiness continued to emphasize that my duty as Sikyong is to envision a movement and Tibetan community without him. So for our Tsawe Lama, for our root guru, the movement, the community is far more important than himself. He wanted the Tibetan community to sustain for a long period of time so that when the day comes when we can return to Tibet, there will be Tibetan community, there will be Tibetan identity, Tibetan culture, Tibetan civilization. So after years of planning, the Kasha launched the 550 Vision in 2017. The 550 Vision is premised on His Holiness's advice to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. It aims to maximize, to resolve the Tibet issue in 5 years based on the middle way approach, while ensuring CTA's resilience to sustain the Tibetan freedom movement and the community, and to preserve Tibetan identity for the next 50 years, if need be. Our plan is not to stay in exile for another 50 years. Our plan is to plan for next 50 years if necessary. The first segment of the 550 Forum was held in October 2017, where experts, scholars, strategists, and old friends of Tibet gathered to deliberate on how to shape Tibet's political future in the next 5 and 50 years. Next 5 years, based on middle way approach on how to have dialogue between the envoys of the Dalai Lama and representatives of the Chinese government to resolve the issue of Tibet peacefully. So that was the main focus, and that's where the experts came and contributed their wisdom and ideas for us. And also the other themes were, what is happening inside Tibet? What could happen inside Tibet in next 5 and 50 years? And how can we, exiled Tibetans and inside Tibet, be connected, maintain our solidarity, unity, and communication through various means? That's very important. And what is happening in China now, politically, given the repression, given the denial of freedom of speech in China, how it affects Tibet, and moving forward, if the Chinese people don't have freedom of speech and human rights, how can we argue for and advocate for our human rights and freedom? And what is happening in India and Asia as a whole, geopolitically, economically, and otherwise, so that how it could impact Tibet issue in India as well as in Asia. And within Asia, there are many Buddhist countries who should be a natural ally, But given the pressure of the Chinese government, even the travel to some of the Buddhist countries even by His Holiness Dalai Lama is difficult. So how can we form a grassroots, human-to-human level contacts with Buddhists in the Buddhist countries so we can build on the alliances and relationship moving forward? And internationally, we all know that there is a decline of internationalism and liberalism and rise of nationalism and extremism. So if you look at the chart of Tibetan movement, the peak of the Tibetan movement internationally was in 1990s, because that's when the rise of internationalism or the liberalism was on an upward trajectory, and we rode the wave. But now there's a reverse wave of nationalism and extremism. So when the whole global scenario, the environment becomes more complex, you don't know how to navigate. Because when you try to navigate, we are on the sides of internationalism and liberalism because we are Buddhists, His Holiness Dalai Lama as a leader, but when you go to country, you often face with nationalist, extremist views. And that's the reality. Now, how you navigate that and how you formulate a narrative that is appealing to everybody, which is extremely difficult. But if you take one side and you are isolated or you are sidelined, and given the pressure and the presence of Chinese government everywhere, then it becomes more difficult. So that becomes a challenge. Now, One Belt, One Road initiative of the Chinese government is endorsed by around 70 countries. They want to connect with the raw materials of Central Asia and Eastern European countries, manufacture goods in China, and capture the European market. If they do so, they will be the #1 economy in the world, and they will dominate the world politically and militarily, and hence you see the increasing expansionist design of Chinese military and foreign policy. So if that's the trend which is going on, how can we formulate a Tibetan narrative that can counter and challenge enormous, gigantic, global, national, and regional policy of the Chinese government? And we do have a counter narrative, because we say we lost our country, Tibet, because of one road. The Communist government of China promised us one highway connecting China to Tibet. And we were promised prosperity and peace. And we believed so, and we helped the Chinese government build that road. And Tibetans were paid in silver and gold coins, mostly silver coins. And our parents and grandparents willingly helped build the road and sang a song saying, the Communist Party is like a parent who shower you with silver coins for helping build our own road for ourselves. That was the belief. But later we found out that the silver coin factories were built near Chengdu, closer to Tibet, so they can supply enormous amount of silver coins for Tibetans. Once the road was built, trucks came, tanks came, army came, guns came, occupied our country. So One Belt, One Road initiative is projected as a benign, mutually beneficial project, but for Tibet, we have a bitter experience of losing our country because of one road. And then the Chinese system is such that they tax the aristocratic family to pay penalty in silver coins if they want to be spared going to prison during the Cultural Revolution. So all the silver coins that the Chinese government sent to Tibet was collected. And we lost our country, and it's been 60 years. Having said that, One Belt, One Road is a big deal globally, and how do we counter that? It's another challenge. And as I said, the integration of Tibetan youth is okay, but assimilation of Tibetan youth is not okay. But recently, at the second 550 Vision Conference on Youth Forum, we faced one challenge. The biggest challenge was the Tibetan youth have spread in around 40 countries. They have become the millennial generation. They can't differentiate between the Tibetan generation and the millennial generation. Once you become millennial generation, their mantra is hashtag YOLO. You live only once. So you should do whatever you like in this life, forget about next life. But as far as Tibetan values and principles concerned, we don't believe in YOLO, we believe in reincarnation. There is life after this life. And we believe in Yarab Sangje. We believe in Chamnyingje. We believe in, these are the values of good mannerism. Next life are innate and integral part of Tibetan values, but our Tibetan younger generation have become the YOLO generation. And when we had the conference, we looked at each other. Of the 100 participants, I think 99 of them spoke Tibetan, but they could not give speeches in Tibetan language. So most of us had to speak in English to understand each other. So as I said, are they getting assimilated or not yet? It's a big challenge. Now, today's conference is on how to build a resilient Tibetan community, which will investigate and find innovative solutions to cultural preservation, economic development, education, and health. So you all are brought here to provide us solutions. And I hope you will do so. And after 3 years, CTA and the Kasha will have less worries, less gray hair. The solution will be provided by you all. With the funding, we will just implement it and problem will be solved. That's our expectation. So no pressures on donors and experts who are here. You didn't hear that part? Okay. I said no pressures on donors and experts because you will provide the solution and the funding. We'll just implement those projects and our problem will be solved in the next 3 years. So we don't have to wait for 50 years. So now talking about culture, the important questions are, what is a Tibet? What is a Tibetan? The harsh reality is that we are heading towards a stage where, in answering these vital questions, Tibetan inside and outside Tibet will refer to an imagined Tibet. An imagined Tibet. Because Tibetan inside Tibet will have no personal memories of independent traditional Tibet. While Tibetan outside of Tibet will only know of a life lived in exile. So hence, we mention Tibet, but for both Tibet inside and outside, it is an imagined Tibet. Defining Tibet requires an appreciation of 3,000 or 12,000 years of the history of Tibetan civilization. It is the recognition of the rich and thriving civilization which was led by our great ancestors. Today, there is a direct threat to that special meaning of Tibet and being Tibetan. Tibetan People's Republic of China's systematic efforts to eradicate Tibetan culture inside Tibet continues. The limited number of Tibetans in exile are dispersed in over 40 countries and subject to rapid assimilation in their respective locations. As a result, CTA is forced to, and we are fully focused on, implementing concrete measures which will sustain the Tibetan culture and identity over the long period so that we can pursue our dignity. It may sound like a daunting task, but don't forget, we have done it before. Let me give you 2 examples. In 7th and 8th centuries, the Tibetan kings and the ministers sent great scholars and translators to India. I think Tibet is perhaps the only country where translators were heralded as heroes, because the powerful ministers and the kings sent translators to India, to Nalanda University, to learn Sanskrit, so that they can translate Buddhist texts, the teachings of Buddha, into Tibetan. And they brought it back to Tibet. Now there are 14 Buddhist countries and 52 countries where large number of people practice Buddhism. But if you go to any of these Buddhist countries, including China, Bangkok, or Thailand, or any of these Buddhist countries, none of them have more than 24 volumes of what Buddha said or his disciples said. It's only in Tibetan language we have 300 volumes of what Buddha said and what Buddha scholars said. So if you want to know about Buddha or Buddhism, you have to understand Tibetan. That was contributed by Tibetan Lotsawas, the scholars in 7th and 8th centuries, and we preserved it for more than 1,000 years. So we are the reservoir, we are the resource, we are the source of Buddha and Buddhist teaching. Now, mindfulness meditation is a big thing nowadays. But if you look at the script of what Buddha said, which is around 100 volumes, 2.5 chapters is dedicated to mindfulness, of which is 140,000 paragraphs on mindfulness. Obviously, we have mindfulness meditation masters who just have 1 page or 2 pages, and they give you mindfulness meditation. They take you to luxurious, expensive hotel, and you stress more about the expenses, the expensive, entrance fees that you pay than the calmness that you are supposed to get from mindfulness meditation. But if you want to understand mindfulness, you have to understand Tibetan literature to understand what Buddha said. 140,000 paragraphs. Also, we have done it. When I say it's not daunting, the challenges that we face. After the occupation of Tibet, 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99.9% of monks and nuns were disrobed. Tibet that we knew, that historical independent Tibet, was lost. But under His Holiness Dalai Lama's leadership and vision, brick by brick, we rebuilt all the major monasteries in India, Nepal, and Bhutan. We trained and re-educated all the geshes around the world, especially in India. So we revived Buddhism or Nalanda tradition in India and all the Himalayan regions with Buddhist centers around the world, all over the world, and also back in Tibet. Many of the exiled educated lamas went back to Tibet, and there were many who survived the Cultural Revolution who revived Buddhism back in Tibet. And now China also happens to be the largest Buddhist country in the world, with 300 to 400 million Chinese are Buddhist. So from complete destruction, with only 2% chance of success, we did it. We have come back and revived Buddhism. So from spiritual, cultural point of view, we won. The Communist Party of China lost. So hence, we have asked you to come here to give us advice and suggestions, but Tibetans on their own, in 7th and 8th centuries, we have done it. And recently, even after the occupation of Tibet, we have done it in reviving Buddhism back in Tibet. Now the big question is, we have revived Tibetan Buddhism culture. How do we take it to the next level? That's the question. Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, who received 100% approval rate by his employees in a survey by Glassdoor, recently stated that he practices compassionate leadership based on the teachings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Very well-known CEO. Weiner is among the millions who follow His Holiness the Dalai Lama. But His Holiness is an exception. He is a renowned teacher of compassion and kindness. But under his leadership, we have hundreds and thousands of trained Buddhist masters, but they lack representation in the booming global industry of mindfulness and happiness. Why are we lacking the visibility in the field where we ought to be the experts? So how do we create masters of Tibetan Buddhism who will act as the messenger of His Holiness at global stage. The challenge is, how do we globalize Buddha's teaching without commodifying it, without diluting the essence of Tibetan Buddhism? That becomes a challenge. Now, on development, assimilation is a reality that we are facing as more and more Tibetans migrate abroad. Yesterday, Richard had a couple of data, and you'll be thrown with all kinds of data. Some are old, some are not updated. But now I said in 2004, I had a small paper called Tibet 2020, Tibet 2020, where in a way projected that Tibetans living abroad and Tibetans living in India, Nepal, and Bhutan will be of equal number. So I think recent demographic study says that there are 85,000 Tibetans in India and Nepal and 65,000 abroad. So we're almost 50% abroad and 50% in India and Nepal. This migration represents the potential loss of a concentrated population, which is crucial for the preservation of Tibetan cultural practices. Within the Tibetan community in India, many of our younger generations spend their daily lives dreaming for the day they can move overseas. They rely on the remittances sent by family members living abroad for the day-to-day expenses. The big misconception they have about life in Western world is that it is a guaranteed good and easy life. There is a greater dignity of labor attached to all types of work abroad. Let me tell you a real story, but in a different place. In New York, Doma went to meet her childhood heartthrob, Tashi. Upon reaching the vegetable vendor, she saw Tashi carrying huge load of vegetables on his head and sweat flowing through his forehead in a ragged situation. She just, at the sight of Tashi, she just cried and just collapsed. And when asked why, and Dolma said, Tashi used to be the hunk of the settlement. He used to be so handsome, so cool on his bike. All the girls used to chase to be with him. Now he was just a coolie carrying vegetables. So that broke her Doma's heart. That many Tibetan youth don't realize, that going west will guarantee you a quality life, a good life, a dignified life. Actually, you go there to do manual work. Obviously, without the right training and skills, you are not guaranteed a good life anywhere in this world. This is a major cause of the high underemployment and unemployment rate we have here today. How can we ensure that rather than trying to find a way out, our youth can find the necessary training and skills right here in India? How can we build a workforce development which will provide skills, capital, employment? How can we give them the support, the vision, and innovative ideas? That's the challenge of the experts who are here and the donors who are going to dole out their funding. Let me give you a success story as far as capital is concerned. Even though through the Department of Finance, we have rolled out a banking scheme where we give loans. There was a lot of hesitation. Like Anne said yesterday, it's like $1.3 million giving loans. So we were providing 100,000 rupees to each of the 1,000 Tibetan sweater sellers. So all the staff of the department were very reluctant to support that scheme, because how can you give 100,000 rupees to 1,000 families without guaranteeing that it will be returned? And I said, let's trust our people, and they will trust our system. And as Anne said, I'm very proud to say that USAID is very proud that not only 100,000 rupees were provided to 1,000 families, and they return all the money before the deadline. Now, this is the Tibetan community. This is the values the elder generation have. Yarab Sangje, good mannerism, Le Gyumde. And we rolled out this project based on our own anecdotal but empirically proven fact that in Ludhiana, the Lalas, the retail sweater sellers, they've been doing business with Tibetans for 40 years. Now, Tibetans go there and ask for loans of sweater, anywhere from 50,000 rupees to 100,000 rupees to 500,000 rupees of loan. And they ask you on a piece of paper, what's your name? And your address, USAID, and where you're doing business, they will say Jaipur or Delhi. And then they write the amount, 50,000 or 500,000 rupees loan. No collateral, no contract, no lawyer, just a piece of paper. And for 40 years, 99.9% of Tibetans have been returning the loan on time before deadline. So they make profit, we make profit, we do good business. So hence the finance department, development, and for the sustenance of the Tibetan settlement, this kind of loan program, providing capital, helps. Now we need to provide skills. We need to provide training so that we can scale up from a sweater selling, roadside business to owning your own shop in a mall. So they are a reliable partner in this business. Now our hope is to build a self-reliant community. Tibetans living abroad can be invited. That's why we have some representation from Tibetan communities abroad as well. Can be invited to support the economic development programs and activities in the refugee communities in India. The remittances that they provide can be allocated towards generating new economic opportunities here. A 50-year development vision calls for the need to re-strategize so that the economic foundation and future prospects of the community as a whole are sustainable in the long run. So that instead of wasting time looking for an exit, our youth will focus on embracing and engaging in the life of our refugee community right here in India. Now, as far as health, as I said, I have to cover all the departments. As far as health department is also concerned, we have rolled out with the support of the USAID and other funders. I know what we call a Tibetan care. I know Obamacare is being challenged in the US, but our USAID funded Tibetan care is very popular. When we rolled it out in 2012 and 2013, 9,770 members joined, subscribers joined. In 2018 and 19, it's 24,321 members. Now the difference was before, the health department, anyone who gets sick, and they submit the bills, they say they are poor, they can't afford it. When we submit the medical bills, the health department could cover 10% or 20%, at most 30% of the expenses. Now with this, they just have to pay 3,560 rupees for 5 members of family, and we cover up to 100,000 rupees. For low-income Tibetans, this means a lot. They don't have to sell their jewelry. They don't have to stop sending the kids to school because we take care. So Tibetan care works. We just want to say to USAID. And then now the amount we collect, we disperse fully. So instead of the health department spending money from their own treasury, now we cover all the reimbursement from the funding we collect from the members as well. Hence, health department is also doing quite well. Now, finally, a vibrant economy and a healthy community requires a solid education system. I think education is the key. And we are proud to say that all the donors here particularly USAID and all donors, have come around or come a long way. Initially, when we applied for the $2 million, USAID and donors were very reluctant. The image of CTA was these conservative, outdated bureaucrats, who are not prone to or not willing to reform and make changes. They were very unwilling to invest. There was a lot of hesitation. The debate went back and forth. Finally, we got that $2 million, and we invested in primary, middle, and high school education. And within 3 years, the result was very clear. For example, in 2010, in the class 12 result, that's a senior result on this Indian exam board. In 2010, we had 127 students who scored 75% and above. The 75% above, it's equivalent to a dean's list. And with the funding, in 2015, it increased to 443 students who scored more than 75%. So from 127 students, it increased to 443 students. That's an increase of 250% of students who scored very high. So what it shows is, with good funding, good planning, good investment, results are there. Now, with the help of the Indian government, all the schools that are based in the settlements are already transferred to us. It has, because we have Indian government-run schools, Tibetan-run schools, it's quite complicated. Now, Indian government-run schools, all the schools and settlements are transferred to us. Now what we have is the teachers and staff are all Tibetans. So they are more dedicated, they are more energized, they are more passionate, and now Tibetan schools are run by Tibetans, hence we are solely accountable and responsible for the result as well. But I'm proud to say my colleague, Education Minister, just came from Belakupi settlement and Hunsu settlement inspecting 2 schools. I went to Kollegal, Bandra, to the settlements. We inspected all the schools. Clearly, in the last 3 months, the schools were transferred in May. In the last 3 or 4 months, results are there to be seen. The students are happy, parents are happy, feedback is there's better discipline, we want to learn, teachers are teaching us, and then we will give you a better result in the month of May to all the donors. So we are very happy that it can be done. Now, also recent scientists, some of the scientists have said with empirical facts that language shapes the way you think. Language shapes the way you think. Now, Tibetans have a challenge. Tibetans are born in Tibet, they speak Tibetan, then they come to India, you speak Indian language, not just Indian language, you have to speak Hindi, Nepali, Karnataka, then they go to Europe, they have to speak French, German, what have you, then they go to Canada and America, they have to speak English. Tibetans, you will see they speak 5 or 6 languages. So if language shapes the way they think, and we think 5 different ways. To make sure that the 3rd generation of Tibetans are well trained, as per His Holiness' advice, our education policy is Dabsho Nyinde, which means bird of 2 wings. So tradition and modernity, Tibetan and English. So bird of 2 wings means you have to, the balance of both wings has to be equal so that you fly in balance and you can fly far. So hence our education system, we teach everything in Tibetan from kindergarten to primary school so they are well versed in mother tongue. The idea being that if you teach in foreign language, let's say in English, you can learn the term. Maybe you can learn the rationale or logic, but you will never learn the concept, the values, the principles underneath, the culture underneath the teaching. So if you teach in Tibetan, you are taught in Tibetan at school, at home you speak in Tibetan, and your community you speak in Tibetan, you learn better. And after primary school, you are taught in English, so that our 3rd generation of Tibetans have both traditional modern values and English and Tibetan education. So this is quite a successful program to the extent that I myself am an empirical witness, because I brought my daughter, who was 7 years old, born and brought up in America, to study in the Tibetan school, and it's been 4 years. I can tell you, she's in class 6. Her Tibetan at her age is better than mine. So this is the Tibetan resilience. This is the Tibetan's determination, that even though the second generation Tibetans had, diluted the Tibetan culture and identity, we are making sure that third generation Tibetans have better education and better sense of their identity. Similarly, we have introduced Tibetan as a second language curriculum for students in the US, and then we teach them Tibetan as a second language, 200 pages of how to read Tibetan, how to speak Tibetan, 200 pages on how to read Tibetan, and 200 pages on how to write Tibetan. So these are the projects that's going on quite successfully, because language and culture is key. As per some experts, around 7,000 languages are spoken in the world now, but we are losing one language every week. It is estimated that 50% of the world's languages will disappear in the next 100 years. So we don't want to be that 50%. We want to be ahead of the curve. So it's a major challenge for all of us. So education being the key, I just want to say education is the solution for our cultural preservation. Education is the solution for development, and education is also the solution for healthy Tibetan community. So there is an old Tibetan saying, let me end with this. The bleating sound of 100 sheep will have no impact when placed next to the roar of one single lion. In order to inspire and influence lions around the world, one must first become a lion themselves and roar like one. And that will be possible through education, and the bell says so too. Let me end with the great Indian scholar, a Nalanda trained scholar, Shantideva. He said, if you can solve a problem, why worry about it? If you cannot solve a problem, then what is the point of worrying about it? So let's stop worrying and start solving right now and here through the 550 Vision Conference. Thank you.